There's a propensity within humanity to reject that which is different to ourselves. We see someone dressed differently or with different colour skin, different shaped eyes or different bodily abilities. And our first instinct is to reject them. Some say this is because of our survival instinct. We're wired to operate in groups and we flourish with a sense of belonging. That means we tend to be drawn to those who are like us and we reject those who are not. While belonging to a group is healthy, it can also lead to the rejection of others who are different to us. And then all those isms, racism, sexism, classism, ableism. That's one of the reasons why Jesus was so radical in his teaching. He constantly broke through social barriers. Think about it. First of all, we have the story of the Samaritan woman. Jesus meets her at a well. And back then, men and women didn't associate with one another in public. And what's more, this was a scandalous woman. She'd had 5 husbands. But we see Jesus breaks down the gender barriers. And then later on, we see Jesus interacting with a Canaanite woman whose daughter was sick. And Canaanites were a despised race. Jesus was of the Jewish faith and he'd come primarily to the Jews. So we've got the issue of race. And yet Jesus heals her daughter. Then we have the story of Zacchaeus. And now Zacchaeus was a very wealthy man. He was a tax collector and he had high social status. While we know that Jesus interacted beautifully with the poor, what we see here is that Jesus interacted with the wealthy. He didn't suffer from classism. Jesus every time broke down the barriers. And then, of course, post-Jesus, after Jesus had died and was resurrected, God sends the Holy Spirit and we see the same pattern emerging. First of all, on the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit's poured out on everyone and they begin to speak in other languages. And what we see here is that God is breaking down the racial barriers. Then we get a story later on in Acts chapter 8 about the Ethiopian eunuch. The Spirit speaks to Philip to go share the gospel to him and he decides to follow Jesus. But remember, this man was also of a very high class. He was from Ethiopia and he was a eunuch. He functioned asexually. So again, what we see here is God breaking down the social barriers. And finally, of course, in that story of Peter's vision on the rooftop in Joppa, where he sees a vision of unclean food and he realizes that God doesn't play favorites amongst the races. And this gospel was available to every religion, every race. And what we see time and time again is that, as Paul wrote to the Galatians, that there's neither Jew nor Gentile, nor slave, nor free, nor male, nor female. And what God was saying is that God accepts everyone, loves everyone, died for everyone, that the gospel is good news for everyone. And I wonder, as we go through life on a day-to-day basis, as we meet people who are different to ourselves, if we too can follow in the ways of Jesus. I know sometimes, even in my own experience, I can feel that barrier forming. I see someone who's different to me. Perhaps they're a different race or they're wearing a different religious item, a headscarf or whatever that might be, that my heart needs to follow the way of Jesus, that I see them first as people created in God's image, equal in God's eyes, that God doesn't play favorites, and that he calls us like Jesus to break down the barriers, to share God's love with everyone that we meet. Thanks for joining into God Conversations today. It's been wonderful to have you. For more God Conversations, having your own conversations with the Holy Spirit, go to godconversations.com and we'll see you next time.